Hi, welcome to Legalized Negligence, where we talk about Florida's wrongful death statutes, particularly Chapter 768.21, subsection 8, which bars a certain class of people from recovering non-economic damages in a medical malpractice lawsuit. My friends Travis and Sabrina are with me today, which everyone knows them. And we got a special guest, Missy Bradley-Ball. You can see her name there on the screen. And she is a counselor who helps people deal with trauma issues and how to kind of move on with your life. I'm probably saying that all wrong now, even though I got it right earlier, I believe. But today we're going to talk about, I've been calling it the story behind the story. A couple of weeks ago, Sabrina brought the idea to me about the third anniversary of her dad's death was coming up, and she was telling me about how all of these things were hitting her that she never realized she would have to go through after her dad died. And so we asked Missy if she would sit in with us to kind of help us sort through this and gather our thoughts, because I believe that the state has caused these issues because of their statute. If this statute wasn't in place, we would be able to hire an attorney who would deal with all of this. But because there are no recoverable damages, no attorney will take our case. So I'm going to turn it over to Sabrina right now. And Sabrina, you can just kind of start telling me what you were sharing with me a couple of weeks ago, and you and Missy can kind of go back and forth with that.
Thank you. Thank you again for joining us today, Missy. It's great to meet you on here. So, I have realized that I've come across things on this journey that I didn't ever want to be on, so to speak, that have really made me think differently about the entire process. Because fighting to end the law may look one way on the outside, right? But on the inside, it's a whole different level of truth, of reality. You live it, you breathe it, you sleep it, you dream it, it consumes you. And basically, to get started, one of the things that I've noticed, even being in the medical field myself, there was no words I can put to explain the feeling of what I am about to talk about. When this happened to my dad, they declined to do an autopsy, naturally, right? So I knew I would pay for one privately. And I got the call the very night they did it with an explanation of what exactly happened. It was right to the point. Um, my mom was with me to listen in, and everything they explained was exactly what we thought happened, that my dad had a blood clot. Even my dad knew he probably had a clot. No one listened. So yes, a 9-inch long blood clot caused a massive saddle pulmonary thromboembolism, and now my dad is dead. So they have 90 days to get you that autopsy report. No problem. I wait and I wait, and when I get that report, I'm so eager to read it now. And I open up this envelope, and the very first thing, on the page of the autopsy, it starts out with the weight of my father's brain. And that was nothing we talked about on the phone. That was nothing that I even thought about for all this time. Now, sure, it's needed when you do an autopsy. They did their job, it's part of it, and that's very normal. But the thought process for the person receiving it, which was me, it never occurred to me. It was the weight of my dad's heart, the weight of all his organs, um, and the detail into each section of this autopsy was so in depth that I felt, kind of anxiety while I was reading it. I felt like, oh my gosh, did I do the right thing? Like, yes, I did. I know my dad would want me to know the truth, but it's the intense dissection that is involved with such a thing, and then you start to visualize it, right? and then you start to think deeper and deeper. And those things you just don't talk about. You don't.
Well, and that process of, as you know, being in the medical field, the process of looking at the medical aspect has taken the dad that you knew and cared about and have, I won't say dehumanized, but that part is gone when you start talking about weights of organs, etc. So part of this trauma is in looking at the reality of what happened with his body. I don't know the reason why you had to pay for the autopsy instead of that being something that was done by the state or the county. And I'm sure that that plays a role in it. The description of trauma, I think, is very accurate. You said it had been 3 years since your dad's death. And when there is betrayal of a system, betrayal trauma of a system, betrayal trauma is separate, a separate experience than the loss of this important person in your life. So they are two different kinds of traumatic events, one being a traumatic loss, a primal loss of a parent, but the other being one that sounds like it's fraught with medical complications that I'm not yet aware of.
I understand. It definitely feels like something I haven't ever felt before. You know, another might seem very small example um of something that I've also gone through and had a very hard time. My son brought home his papers from school. Um, he was 7 when this happened to my dad, and I was going through old school work, learning how to count by fives. And on his paper, it had numbers, and certain numbers were missing where he had to fill them in. And the top row said 5, 10, 15, 20, then so on, 25, 30. All I saw was 10, 15, 20. That's yesterday's date. That's my dad's 3 years. That, when that hit me, I lost it. I'm like, I am losing it because of how I'm feeling, but this is my son's schoolwork. He's learning to count by fives, and to anyone else that may not stick out. But seeing 10, 15, 20, I lost my mind. It hurt. I was like, it was another reminder, and that it just shouldn't be that way, right? What happened to life before this? Where is that life at? I think sometimes that is the life that we miss so much, that we don't think about these pains or these stories that are hurting us after it's happened, because we try to be strong, we try to push forward, and we try to set a good example for our children or whoever, and be a role model, but ultimately inside.
Did anybody else freeze up?
Of those triggers that are a part of the loss, and they are a normal part of loss, but they're a traumatic part
Very.
nonetheless.
Yes, I what I notice is, on the outside, we all look like somebody who has what opposition may call a sad story, right? We all have a sad story, no problem. Okay. But there's so much more to it. And no one has time to talk about all these little details that go into um how life changes after something like this happens. Just a brief overview of some other things that I have found myself thinking about, and then we'll let someone else talk, is almost when like and I don't like using this as an example, but like when a drive-by happens, right? Or a car crash. You find out who it was, and they are pursued for real accountability, like one that's to the point where we hope they don't ever do it again. But in my case, in my dad's case, because it happened and there's this law, you know, I know where they were, and I know where they're at. I know their phone number. I know so much. I know too much about them and what is being done. What is really being done. So sometimes I find myself questioning, like, had this been a car accident, or had this been, happened differently, I would be able to pursue so much more than I can now. And the lack of accountability for my dad's case is just something that I cannot stand. There's no motivation to do better. Um, Another thing that often stays on my mind is just how you see a person on the outside, how they're fighting, how they're talking about it, how they're coming up with ideas. Um, but no one really knows the inside struggle. When my dad died, he did not have a will. And the Department of Health wouldn't even take my complaint until I had personal representative of his estate. To go through that process, now I had to prove to the courts that I was that person, which it was no problem. I'm my dad's only child and he wasn't married, but still, you have to go through so many exhausting obstacles to get to the small bit of accountability that they will say this is. And is it really enough? It's not. It's not, in my opinion.
Yeah, the system makes a situation that is very difficult and painful to begin with, can, through the red tape that's it's supposed to be there to protect us and to hold the system together, often makes it much more difficult to function and to deal with the loss. Kind of the administrative aspects of the laws is can be really exhausting and maddening.
Missy, let me clear up something. When you said you don't know why Sabrina had to pay for the autopsy, from my days of working with the organ donor program in Tennessee, if a person died after being admitted to the hospital, if they died within the first 24 hours, an autopsy had to be performed. However, if they died after 24 hours, the state relied on whatever the hospital doctors put down as a cause of death. So from that, you can see where it puts us in a very difficult position. When we think malpractice has occurred, the person has been in the hospital for more than 24 hours. And now the very people that we believe committed the malpractice get to assign a cause of death. But you can go outside the hospital and pay for a private autopsy, which both Travis and Sabrina did. And another, well, more than them, but there was another very recent case where the hospital screwed up on this young girl, and her mom had to pay for a private autopsy and discovered hers was so profound that the medical examiner went back and changed the cause of death on the on the death certificate. So, I mean, these cases are happening all the time. And, we're just trying to point out to the legislature, this is your law that caused this. And if you're serious about holding doctors accountable, we need to be able to get into court to expose their negligence.
Right. And that gets into the whole issue of betrayal blindness. Betrayal trauma um, began to be looked at more when from sexual abuse trauma. That's when it became a thing and began to be investigated and researched significantly during the time when there was a system, and one of the main systems in the original research was about the Catholic Church and the sexual abuse in terms of how the system was set up to protect the priest. Now, there are a lot of other systems that have violated people, but this betrayal blindness is how the reason that people can't see. So in the sex abuse case in the Catholic Church, the people that couldn't see were not only the parishioners, which tended to villainize the people that came forward that had gone through trauma, but they also, the blindness was also in the different levels of the system, all the way up at the time to the Vatican. So when we have systemic betrayal, we're always going to have betrayal blindness. Some of it is the denial kind of blocks the ability to recognize wrongdoing. Some of that is because of just ignorance, of not knowing how a particular law plays out. What does that actually mean? And that's the place where that educating the system is imperative, and which I think that this format is doing an excellent job in just even the basic education of this law creates the opportunity, or not opportunity, but the likelihood that this is going to happen. So a lot of it is out of ignorance. Then we get into the undue influence of somebody not wanting to see because it's going to cost them money or power or etc. And we get into the more nefarious aspects of betrayal blindness, which is also a real thing. Not all of it is nefarious. Not all of it is sort of innocent. It still has the impact. So when we look at politicians and lawmakers, one of the questions is why did they benefit in the law being written exactly how it's written? And how I think you had said how important it is to not only to educate, but to help that system, again, the politicians and the lawmakers, make recommendations, come with your own ideas and why it's important that it be changed. But in order for people to be able to do that piece, there has to be enough healing in the betrayal trauma in order to take action. And betrayal trauma is a real thing, and it causes such an extraordinary breach of trust that sometimes we don't trust ourselves in betrayal trauma. We don't know who to trust or who not to trust, especially early in the process. And there is literally an emotional dynamic that takes place in the betrayal trauma, because betrayal trauma, there's a vortex of anger and blame and hurt and sadness, which are normal, but people don't move through the healthy version of trauma to be able to move into advocacy. And advocacy is so essential for what you all are talking about. And so trauma itself has to be eventually transformed into the advocacy. And that's a hard thing. And part of the reason why some people move to advocacy as a part of their healing and some people can't.
You know, when I try to
So-
explain this to people, I'll often use the example of, imagine all the stories we've heard in the news in recent years about police and police misconduct. And it really, I mean, we had seen it growing, but once George Floyd died, people really kind of woke up to like, hey, what's going on here? And I think that put
Mhm.
the way to relate it to what we're talking about, how do you look at your police and trust them anymore? When you see something as blatant as what that officer did to George Floyd, and to know that his department said he was only following policy, you know, we're kind of in that same position. We see this medical malpractice, but our government has created a shield that we can't get through in order to protect that doctor, all based on the allegation that doctors were leaving the state because their malpractice premiums were so high. So does that mean, and I'll use Travis's words here, does that mean our rights were sold in order to benefit the doctors and the insurance companies? Is that what the state of Florida did? And I say yes, that's exactly what they did. Travis, do you have anything you'd like to say?
Yeah, because this issue, while we are all grounded in medical malpractice, it goes into other areas as a result of medical malpractice. I'll back up and cover my dad a little bit. He was a business owner. He employed several families, and when he went to his doctor, it was undiagnosed lung cancer that he had, and the doctor just kept putting it off, wouldn't spend the money or have my dad spend the money to do a chest x-ray. Eventually it went to his neck and got nodules, and so he went to an ENT, took an x-ray, and it caught the top of his lungs, and that's how his lung cancer was discovered. Great, we have a diagnosis, we can work on it. A medicine was working wonders. He was given 6 months to live, but the medicine gave him 2 years. But we only lost him at 2 years after an 80% reduction in the original source. His whole body cleared up. It was found at stage 4 lung cancer, and it had cleared up throughout his entire body, and the original mass reduced 80%. But then the legislature of the nation enacted Affordable Care Act, Obamacare. And because my dad's insurance didn't have the required minimum coverage for him getting pregnant, he lost his coverage. So his $10 a month prescription for his cancer meds went to over $300 a month. So he lost his meds that were saving his life due to politics. So that's a betrayal right there, in my opinion. So being a vet, we went to the VA. Well, the VA, they forgot about him. They said, well, at first, we don't have that medicine on our schedule of medicine, so we can't give it to you. And then his doctors ended up forgetting about his care. And you'll probably remember there was a second waiting list. Well, he fell into that. And then we had a change of presidents. And then the VA got straightened out, and they came to him and says, we'll pay for your meds if you sign this document. By then it was too late, because the cancer came back, went to his brain, crossed the blood-brain barrier. The medicine won't do that. So we lost my dad because of that, because of politics. Well, that produced the life insurance policy that a consultant to the FBI on financial crime issues, he was to invest that. Well, he promptly stole the money. There's another betrayal of trust. So he goes and is brought up on charges, and the government uses my mom's fraud to send him to jail. During that case, as part of the plea bargain, my mom was to get priority restitution. And then all the other victims, there were 8 victims or 11 victims with 8.5 million total stolen. Anyway, with my mom's priority written in there, and then everybody else would get normal priority, the transcriptor or whoever does the writing, they used the wrong statute in my mom's paragraph for restitution. And so the prosecutor who's going and prosecuting my mom's case, she actually goes against my mom's benefit and argues that because of the error, my mom should only get in the same restitution as everybody else. So she only ends up getting 9.25% of the recovery on her own case. I did not know at the time that the judge, well, the prosecutor could have amended the plea agreement knowing that it was an error, and she chose not to do it. The judge could have taken into economic circumstances of all the victims and adjusted everybody's restitution levels, because my mom had lost everything. She lost everything. You know, family was contributing to her for years. That was not done. That's another betrayal to find this. Later, going through the document, the attorney for the defendant, he tried to extort the government by saying, I know where some stuff is in a safety deposit box. He's still practicing. He was not disbarred. That's another betrayal. Shortly thereafter, my mom had her heart attack and I took her to the hospital. And promptly, within 12 hours, they commit an adverse medical incident upon my mom and don't notify us. We could have elected to go to a better hospital had we been told, but we weren't. So that kept us under their control. They didn't follow civil statute in providing notifications of my mom being able to have her cardiologist that was literally right across the street participate in her care. So the hospital or their staff isn't following the law there. The primary care physician was not notified within 24 hours of admittance. That's another civil statute. That's all these trusts are being broken, and yet we have been brought up to believe in our medical community. I ended up losing both my parents due to misplaced trust. And then as I go into my duties as the estate rep, I find that all these laws are put upon me to follow, but there's no book on how to do the procedures. It's like I was trying to get the documents from the autopsy company, and they're fighting me tooth and nail because I want the photos so I can give to expert witnesses, but they won't give them to me. Now, I understand some people can't deal with photographs and stuff. Not an issue. I'm too angry to let that concern me. My focus is getting into court, but then we have this law that says I can't get into court. So I'm going through the medical record, through the radiology, and I find 4 files of the esophageal sonogram. 4 files are missing out of 22. And I'm like, how am I supposed to get an expert witness to give me a certificate of merit if those 4 files show what I need for this guy to give me the certificate of merit? That's another betrayal. And I'm finding this out time and time again. I found backdating in the medical chart. Were they too busy? Why did they have to backdate 12 hours or 10 hours worth of care if they weren't too busy? I know because I was there for 5 days that they did not walk in that room and do this work. There's another betrayal. We rely on the law. We rely on people to follow the law. And it's just, as you say, it's systemic. And it seems like everybody's doing it. And yet we are caught up in it. And it makes me furious that there are so many people that are oblivious to what's being perpetrated against them. And they're at risk and they don't know it. And I guess that's why ignorance is bliss. Because if they knew it, they would be up all hours of the night, like Philip, Sabrina, and I are, and everybody else that's living this nightmare. Right. We're paying the price to save the doctors and the medical insurance companies their money, their profits.
Right.
it's an ongoing expense on us.
Travis, this is obviously a personal question. How are you dealing with all the levels of betrayal of trust that you've been describing?
I break down upon every time I discover a new one, but I remember that anger is easier for me to hide the emotion. I'm about to break down now. I have to force myself into being angry. Otherwise,
Okay.
I can't speak. My throat tightens up and whatever.
Okay.
That's the only way to deal with it. You take medicine, melatonin or whatever to put you to sleep because you're sitting in bed, your brain won't shut down, but you got to get up the next day to do work because, it's like we have our own jobs. I'm self-employed. I take care of a bunch of businesses, IT work. And I got that life. I got my family life. I got this life, and medical malpractice stuff. And it's just overwhelming. I had to shut down, with my brothers and sisters' help, my dad's business and lay off all those people. Because of retention, I still had to keep all those paperwork from the business for X many number of years. I just recently had to go through all that and destroy all the materials. And that just brings it all back. I'm still doing the estate sale stuff, so I'm the one going through all the memories. My brother and sister, they're out of state. They can't really help that much, but every box is a new set of memories. And the legislature doesn't understand that this is traumatic. It really is. And, but hey, we got to keep the doctors here because, we need them to commit medical malpractice. That's what they're doing. They're not letting the 3 strikes rule do its duty by letting us get into court and get a strike against them. They're fighting us tooth and nail, and I don't understand it. I really don't.
Is that are you going at the like the AMA or Florida's AMA to try to make changes? Or
I had engaged with one of the lobbyists, and the lobbyists brought the AMA in, and Sabrina and Philip was in on these Zoom meetings, and not much. We did 2 meetings, and then they decided to have no more. The lobbyist still talks to Sabrina and such, but the AMA they just weren't interested because it doesn't suit their business purposes. The problem is if you stop the occurrence of medical malpractice, everything else is moot. It goes away. Everything else is a result of the medical malpractice. So if you deal with that, problem solved. But they don't want to deal with that. They want to deal with the financial expenditure. And it just doesn't make sense.
Missy, if I could give you just a little bit, if you were going to respond to Travis, go ahead. I'll wait a minute.
Go ahead.
Okay. I'll explain this to you, but also anybody who views this needs this lesson as well. I'm reading several books currently about the myth of medical malpractice, and they date all the way back to the early 1970s. It began in California. And what they've discovered is that, and this is, if you go back to the early 1970s, that would make it 50 years now, I guess. What they've discovered is that there is a boom or bust cycle in the insurance industry. And it's got to do with the fact that, I even thought before I started reading about this, that it was simply like any other business, money in, money out. You pay premiums, the insurance company has a pool of money, somebody makes a claim, they take out of that pool of money and pay it. It's not like that in the medical malpractice world. The state legislatures gives the insurance industry a very wide berth, a very wide period to make adjustments, because if medical malpractice occurred today, it might be 5 to 10 years later before the insurance company knows exactly how much they're going to wind up paying out in this, because sometimes it can take a couple of years to even discover the malpractice. Then it can take a couple of years to determine, or even longer than that, to get it into court. And then once it's in court, to determine, well, what kind of damages is this guy going to suffer? So the legislatures in the various states gave the insurance companies like this roughly a 10-year period. It varies state to state, but roughly a 10-year period to sort of predict what's going to happen, in the future. So when they predict wrong and suddenly their reserves fall, the insurance company they seize that opportunity, and they run to the legislature and, like Chicken Little, the sky is falling, the sky is falling. We're going to have to raise malpractice rates, and doctors can't afford to do that. So the people in the legislature who have regular jobs other than the time that they're in session, they don't go out and investigate it. They just say, well, you brought this problem to us. Here's what can we do to help? Well, you can limit the number of lawsuits that people can file. So that's what Florida did back in 1990. They carved out a certain class of people and say, y'all can't file a claim. That'll help bring down the cost. Well, now we're discovering that, no, that's not the problem. The real epidemic is the medical malpractice itself. In a 1988 task force study that Travis and I both read, it said that 4% of doctors in Florida caused 42% of malpractice payouts. So a logical thinking person would say, well, if I got rid of every 4 bad doctors out of 100, I could save 42% in premiums. But because, and now I'm going to go back, I'm going to have to throw in a little bit of civics lesson here, because the people don't stay involved in their government. The only side of the story that the legislature hears is from the lobbyist. And the legislature is relying on us to present them another story. So when Travis and I met roughly a year ago, and Sabrina, he had known Sabrina before I did, but we all started getting together and saying, look, these numbers just don't add up. So we started doing our own research, and now we created this Legalized Negligence group, and we're presenting the other side of the story to the legislature to say, hey, did the lobbyists ever tell you about this? Did the lobbyists tell you that in 1988, there was a ballot in Florida, an amendment on the Florida ballot that asked the voters to decide if they wanted caps on damages and tort claims, and it was overwhelmingly defeated. The people spoke and said, no, we don't want damages capped. The task force also recommended against barring anybody from being able to file a med mal claim. So what did the legislature do? They went completely against the task force. Now, you have to understand that in 2023, you've got a whole new breed or a whole new flock of legislators. They're not the same people who were there in 1990. So all they know is that, well, when the issue has come up in past years, this is what they did. So I guess that's what we're supposed to do. It's sort of like on that TV show Lost. I don't know if you ever saw it. We have to push the button every 108 minutes because the last guy pushed the button every 108 minutes. So what Travis and I and Sabrina are doing is we are bringing them new evidence to look at, to say there are other ways to solve this crisis if there truly is a crisis. So I'll shut up now.
I just want to applaud you all for looking at that system and looking at where it has broken down. And it sounds like educating the community, but also educating the legislature is essential. Whomever is making the laws and whatever the influences are. How are you all getting your names out so people know that this group exists?
Well, we have a YouTube channel where this video will be uploaded later today. And we also have a Facebook group. We've just recently created our logo that you see there. We do things like, this is a rack card that I have recently created. I'm going to have those printed. Sabrina will be taking those. Travis and Sabrina are going to Tallahassee in January when the legislature goes back into session, and they're going to have a little table set up, and they're going to hand our research out to people and give them these rack cards and so forth to bring it to their attention. Now, bills are already being filed in Florida, before they go into session. All the bills will be filed. And I'm happy to say that the research Travis and I have done over the past year, Sabrina has been able to put it in the hands of several representatives, at least one senator, and last week in the Speaker of the House's hands. She had a face-to-face meeting with him and literally handed this stuff to him for him to look at and go, wow, the lobbyists haven't been telling me about that. One representative has already filed a bill, and she had a co-sponsor, so it's bipartisan. There's a Democrat and a Republican on her bill now, and there is a senator who is working on one currently, but I can't say any names at the moment.
Okay.
But it's just
the
people who are relentless. That's how we get it out. We just tell everybody we can.
Okay. I just can't say enough of the level of importance, not only in the healing, but in the change of the trajectory with what you all are doing. And it sounds like you've got that as it relates to Florida. And I hope that this begins to spread across the country. The knowledge, the questioning, the educating, the consumer, and anything that I can do to help educate the system as well. It seems like it needs to go back even further so people know not before there's a problem, but know just in general, people owning a sense of power about their health care. And there's such a sense for so many people that doctors are gods and that you don't question. And so just even the basic advocating, asking questions, going into your doctor with bullet points and give the doctor that piece of paper, you save it, so they know that you're also you're an advocate for your own health or for your loved one's health, that you're not going to go quietly away, that you're watching, you're paying attention. And I had heard, I don't know if this is true, that the majority of malpractice cases are higher with people that also have really bad bedside manner, that they are not, that they disregard, they don't hear, their patients do not feel heard. So there's already a system of where things are going to fall through the cracks.
There's a problem. There's a problem in that you can't monitor your medical care progress, because while you're admitted or under care, they won't give you access to the medical record. You can file a HIPAA request, but they got 30 days to give it to you. So hopefully you're out of care by the time that occurs. But while you're at the hospital, they won't let you monitor your record.
One of our family members when her husband was going through terminal cancer, one of the things she did was she took pictures with her phone every time a person came in, so it had their badge number. She took pictures of whatever the drip was, anything that she took a picture of it.
Yeah.
So
I would say get a 360-degree camera and just put it there, leave it on, for the very reason that you said. I have pictures of my mom's telemetry machine showing alarms going off, but none of those alarms are reflected in the medical report. You know, and HIPAA is not us as a consumer. It's not our concern. That is medical providers' concern. So take your pictures.
good point. Good point.
Yeah, the thing that I always get back to is it's a problem with the people having lost touch with their government. And that came over time. I mean, when our country was first formed, people were very involved with their government. You know, they had just broken from Britain. They wanted to keep a very close eye on this new thing that they created. But over time, they fell into life. And over time, there's been less and less daily involvement with government. And especially over the last 60 years, you and I have talked about the Frankfurt School that I mentioned to you one time, and how that started changing the way people were taught in the school. And all you have to do is look at what you see today. You know, these telephones that everybody carries around, that's their only interest. You know, I'm going to watch a TikTok video. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. And when they discover this law in Florida, it's only after the person dies. It's not like they know about it. Now, they can tell you all about the transgender bathroom issue, or they can tell you about the Don't Say Gay bill, or they can tell you about something like that. But when they have somebody die and they say, well, I think malpractice occurred, I'm going to call an attorney. The attorney asks them two questions. Was your loved one married at the time? And did they have any children under the age of 25? And if the answer to those is no, then the attorney says, there's nothing I can do for you. And that's when their outrage comes up. You know, it's like they should know about this beforehand. And I'm guilty of it too. I had no idea when my mom died that there was a law like this, you know, but that's why we're trying to spread it so that people become as aware of this as they do when, you know, a cop pulls them over and they're going to get arrested. Well, you didn't read me my Miranda rights. Well, the only reason you even know about Miranda rights is because you watch TV. You know, well, we want people to be just as aware of this. So,
is that typical in other states? This rule about the if your children are over 25?
No, from what we've been able to find out, Florida is the only state that has that particular law. Now, there are other states that have similar laws, but we haven't been able to go look at the laws of all 49 other states to determine exactly, but we do have a Florida representative in a committee meeting making that statement that Florida is the only state that has this particular law. But like I say, some other states have some similar laws, you know, and I can understand what they're trying to get at. It's like, where do you stop allowing family members to recover pain and suffering damages? Is it just at the children, or does that extend to cousins? How about aunts and uncles? Or do we go to second cut? You know, who gets to put their finger in this pie? But every family is different. Not every family is, you know, the Ward Cleavers or the, you know, Dick Van Dyke Show kind of family. You have families now where grandmothers raise children. Are they not just as connected to those families? You have, you know, foster families and adoptions, and you have all this stuff that is not, it doesn't always fit the textbook definition of something. You know, well, I won't go there. I'll leave that one alone. But All we're asking is for the same right that every other person in Florida has, and that is to get into the civil courts. If we can make our case and win, then great. But we still have to prove medical malpractice. We just want our ability to do that, just like everybody else can. And there are Article 1, Sections 21 and 22 of the Florida Constitution say that all citizens have a right to access the courts, and all citizens have a right to a trial by jury, and those rights are to remain inviolate. And I don't have to tell you what that word means. It means you cannot ever touch these. But in 1990, some people, and I've got to believe it was insurance companies, convinced the legislature that, you're going to lose doctors if you don't do something about this. And that gave the government a compelling interest to violate certain people's rights. And had it been reviewed by the Supreme Court under what's known as strict scrutiny, it probably would not have passed the test. But they reviewed it under rational basis, which means that if you can just come up with some kind of belief that, this that the government has a compelling interest, then we defer to the legislature. If they wrote it, it's got to be constitutional. So, but
Yeah.
And
how?
No, go ahead, Missy.
One of the questions is how do you make it where what's in it for them? Because if people don't know that they have skin in the game, they're not going to pay attention. So what are the things, aside from educating them to this law that is in place, how do you help them to understand this also benefits them to pay attention to this?
When you say them, are you talking about the people or the legislature?
The legislators, what's in it for them?
For the legislature.
Because the idea of doing the right thing doesn't seem to have a whole lot of influence. Well, so part of it is, how do we get them to listen?
Well, see, this is the problem, is they get contributions from the political action committees and these other organizations. And a lot of them are attorneys, and they just happen to be with law firms that litigate on behalf of the hospitals and doctors. So listening to the people, representing the people, is a direct contradiction to their business.
Okay.
So yeah, that's a tough one to overcome.
My answer to that would be exactly what Travis said, but it would have to come under campaign finance reform. And I have been hearing about campaign finance reform since I was a teenager. And it's always an issue. How do you stop very wealthy corporations from making donations to lawmakers? Now, the problem is that you can't prove that donation persuaded the lawmaker to vote one way or the other. Human nature tells us that it probably did, but I can't make that accusation. But I know if somebody gave me $1 million to park my car in a different place, even though that place was more convenient, I'd probably park my car in a different place.
Okay. Yeah.
But, well, Travis, can you think of anything else? We got a little bit off the topic of the betrayal trauma thing, but I think it was necessary to bring in a little bit of civics into this, because people.
Well, we could, for the betrayal trauma, we can look at the administrative court and its composition. For medical examiners, or not medical examiners, but for the medical board, it's made up of 12 doctors, one hospitalist, or not hospitalist, but one risk management person working for a hospital,
Okay.
and then 2 other citizens, which if you look at the current composition, they work for law firms that defend, hospitals and doctors. So who does the people have on the medical board to represent us? So it's like if you get a ticket and going to traffic court and you got 12 officers, they're all going to side against you. So the medical court is a betrayal. It truly is. My complaint for against the hospital for the agency of agency of healthcare administration, I put it in 2001, January 2001, and they delayed it. They sent me an email saying, we'll have 3 years to look at this. In that time, someone else filed another complaint that covered the same topics as what I had in my complaint. They found 3 people died of lack of telemetry monitoring. Had they serviced my complaint, they would have found the issue with my mom's case, corrected it, and those 3 people might be alive today. But because they put it under risk management and they had 3 years to service it, those other people lost their lives. That's a betrayal. And it wasn't until I called them up and I said, look, I'm going to take this to court if you don't do whatever. The next week, they serviced my complaint and they found nothing wrong because it was already addressed by the complaint that came after mine. Before I knew that, I found out that the hospital had 55 medical professionals out of compliance with their license requirements for over 170 days. The fine is $1,000 per person per day. That's $9.35 million in fines. They were only fined $1,000 for all that. And they were still out of compliance at the time that the survey completed. So it goes beyond the 170 days. But it seems like every claim, there's only $1,000 fine. And I'm like, well, no wonder the hospital doesn't follow the rules. If they get caught, they only pay $1,000. But they might save a lot more money by not having to hire someone to come and do this continuing ed and such. But that's the emergency department I took my mom to. And that's the emergency department that committed the adverse medical incident.
Wow.
But I can't use the finding of the adverse medical incident in my complaint because the medical board won't look at it because the statute says it's inadmissible in administrative and civil court. But the state finds it important enough to know about it.
That's one of our arguments, Missy, is pointing out the differences between having access to the civil courts and being the only remedy that the legislature gave us was to access the administrative courts. We're coming up on an hour now. Would you, Travis, unless you had any other questions or things you wanted Missy to address, Missy, would you mind just kind of some closing thoughts on, let me see if I can word this properly. People who fall under this subsection 8 category, this class of people, how to take this betrayal that they have experienced. And I think that betrayal is by both the medical profession and the government. How to take that and turn it into something positive to move forward and become an advocate instead of a victim.
Yeah, one of the things that I think is significant is in betrayal trauma, we are not as effective as we can be until we have done some level of healing and moving beyond the vortex. Again, anger and blame and hurt and sadness, we lose our power in that because it takes so much bandwidth to be angry. It takes so much bandwidth to be hit by, like Sabrina said, those anniversary dates, those details that she was blindsided by, these things that you keep bumping up against and finding yet another layer of betrayal. When people do specifically the betrayal trauma work, and you begin to move into the other aspects of grief, because what this is complicated grief. And when we're in complicated grief, we aren't going to be as effective. And it sounds like you all are incredibly effective, but I also think about if you also have some time for you, and to do this work, how much more effective, how much more strategic that you would be, because this is huge. What you're describing sounds like there's so many levels of where things are not just, and some of it is just poor oversight. Some of it is probably certain that there's some things nefariously positioned to be ineffective, and to be able to separate what are you, and maybe you do know, I see this huge system that needs to be changed, and do you have a strategic system of how to go at it? When I say a little at a time, I know it's really big. Each piece is huge, but I'm also seeing a really huge system that's crumbling. And it's going to take everything within you to do this work. And the betrayal trauma itself is exhausting. And how do you begin the healing of that so you are at your best game? You bring your best game emotionally and strategically to it. Philip, I see you have moved into a very different space where you're very strategic in this, and that the emotions of the loss you've done tremendous amount of work around that, and it's part of why I think you are able to, and maybe this is true for you too, Travis, but I know Phil better. It has enabled you to be more strategic, have more finesse to deal with systems that are kind of good old boy, or just that mix of mess that's a part of the political system, whatever political system.
Well, I would,
and so you're really strategic. I just think that you're very strategic.
Well, thank you for saying that. I'm just hoping that anybody that watches this video can find some way to turn their anger and their trust issues and all that, turn it into something where they can actually get something done about it. Because I've seen that it paralyzes people in any time they see their government do something wrong. And firearms was a big issue for me in Tennessee a couple of years ago, and we got some changes made there. I think that's why Travis and I work together so well, because he's got an incredible mind, and he knows how to research like nobody's business. And we'll share things back and forth, and we eventually come up with a strategy. And I don't know what drives him, but I think part of the reason that I've been able to compartmentalize is, number one, due to my training in medicine. When you have a sick person laying in front of you, you just have to block that out, that it's a human being for the moment, take care of their problem, and then give them comfort. I know it's going to hurt if I sew this up, but it's got to get sewed up. And the other part is, I think my training in the military taught me that no matter what the situation is, you still got to get up and go through it. You just got to go do it. I don't know that I've actually dealt with the grief of my mom dying yet. I may have just set it aside and said, I'll deal with that after I take care of these scoundrels in government. But right now, they're the ones that I've got to take care of. I don't know if other people can do the same, and I don't even know how to tell you to get that way. Go spend 6 years in the military. I don't know how you get like that. Maybe Travis has some thoughts on it.
I find that anger is more productive than being upset. And I have found to relish the simple pleasures of going outside, feeling the breeze against my skin, and having the goal of in the future, at some point in time, this will come to an end, and I will just be able to relax and enjoy life again.
Yeah.
It's the vision of that goal that keeps you going.
Well, Missy, we thank you
It
so
sounds like both of you are being of service to all others as well that don't yet know that these injustices exist.
Well, Travis has children, so I know that he would want to do something to make his children never have to go through it. I just don't trust government. I mean, I just don't trust government at any level. So maybe that's why I do it. But Missy, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate what you had to share with us, and hopefully we can get a lot of people to watch this. So,
Thank you, and thank you both, and Sabrina for inviting me today. So thank you very much.
I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording, but if you two will hang on, we can say goodbye in just a minute.
Okay.
Let me find my cursor. I know it's on one of these screens somewhere. There it is.